The Silent Film Museum. I've always liked old horror movies, but I never really was a silent film enthusiast. I just found them too artsy and strange to really enjoy. It's like watching a talkies-era movie where everybody has been replaced by mimes, and with awful camera quality. Though you have to respect the movies like Nosferatu and The Golem for being so iconic and getting Blu-ray releases. And thanks to internet forums, I do have some knowledge on the matter. Anyway, have you ever heard the stories of those obscure Eastern European museums that supposedly house all kinds of long-lost prints? I did, and I thought it was unlikely too. I was on vacation in Budapest to visit some distant relatives, which I hadn't seen for years. My family has lived in the US since 1910. So I had never been to Hungary before, though my third cousin and his wife had come over to the US a couple of times. It was my first night in Budapest, and I was staying in a low-budget hotel just outside the inner city. When I woke up, the first thing I saw was the snow gently covering everything outside. After getting up, I decided I'd check out some famous landmarks first, since my appointment with my third cousin wasn't until tomorrow. After seeing some famous landmarks and watching the Western-influenced buildings and Soviet concrete slabs making their way for each other many times, I decided that it was time to go back to my hotel room. I was already nearing the area when I stumbled upon an advertisement. It was a faded poster that drew my attention because of the strange black and white image on it, depicting a sad, mime-like face surrounded by what must have been stills from old movies. Above it, there was some critical writing I didn't understand. Not very inviting. I was about to move on when I saw there was a small English translation below, which said, Budapest Institute of Silent Films, Miracles of Modern Age. I chuckled. Didn't seem very impressive. So I went back to my apartment and texted a bit with my colleagues until I dropped myself onto the bed bored shitless. I studied the patterns on my bedsheets and thought of everything I'd seen today. But eventually, even that didn't save me from the boredom, until the image of the old poster popped into my head again. What was that thing for anyway? Probably just some old movies. What else could it be? Books? Racing cars? The poster was obvious enough. Not that I would get to see any of that anyway. Those prints had to be nearly dead. Or maybe I would. And it would be one of those crazy German flicks. I started to get curious. Maybe there would be some exclusives that were never put online. Screw it, I thought. It couldn't be worse than just sitting on my arse here the entire time, could it? So at about 3 o'clock, I went back outside to where I saw the poster. The sad mime's eyes greeted me from a distance, and I could barely make out the address under all the stills. I will not display it here. I want nobody else to go through this. Not even those who are morbidly curious to the point of stupidity. After some research, I finally found the location of the street on the map. The only thing I'll say about this is that it was far from Budapest itself. I took a bus ride through snowy streets, beautiful fields, and eventually the bus dropped me off at what looked like an old warehouse, in a quarter filled with old, featureless concrete buildings. This really didn't seem like the place for an art museum. For a moment I was considering waiting for the next bus to pick me up again. But I was too curious now. I didn't come all this way for nothing. As I looked around a bit, I noticed this part of the city seemed quiet. I barely saw any people on the street, and when I did, it usually was a homeless person quietly walking by, treating me as if I didn't exist. The buildings looked faded, either out of use or straight out abandoned. A couple of streets later, I stood before what had to be the museum. With all the concrete architecture, it looked just like the other buildings. The windows were faded and scratched, there was graffiti on the walls and tiny cracks in the concrete walls. But it looked like it was still in use. Above the double doors, there was a sign in cryptic text, probably the title of the museum. After taking a deep breath, I opened one of the doors and stepped inside. Inside, There was what looked like a receptionist lobby, but there was no one around. The walls were white, dirty, and completely empty. Once again, I considered leaving now because this whole place was probably abandoned. But when I saw the lobby desk had a bell I could ring, I did. And the echo sent chills down my spine. Who knew if this building was even inhabited? My thoughts were interrupted by the sound of footsteps growing louder. I turned around and saw a bearded man in an old business suit step into the room from the hallway. He frowned at me with coal black eyes, with an emotion that was impossible to determine. After an awkward silence, he started talking rapidly in Hungarian, wildly pointing his hands to the hallway and back at me. I tried to tell him I couldn't understand, but he was getting wilder by the second, shouting at me and forcing me near the door. Finally, hastily I grabbed some folded bills from my pocket and showed him, and he seemed to calm down. After raising 5 fingers to determine how many bills he wanted, I was allowed to go inside. As I walked back into the hallway, I found that the receptionist was still on the other side of the hall, staring at me with unblinking eyes, as if he wanted something from me. I waved at him, but nothing I did seemed to affect him. For a moment, I considered walking up to him, but I couldn't get myself to do it. After an awkward silence, I moved into the next room. A huge still of a man with jagged teeth and a top hat immediately caught my eye. It felt familiar, but I couldn't bring myself to remember it. "London, after midnight," spoke a creaking voice from behind me. I turned around and saw an elderly man with a cane smiling at me. "Yes," I said back to him. "I remember now, but it's a lost film, isn't it?" "That's what I thought," he replied. "Until now." He pointed to an encased film print below the still. "That's impossible. The last print burned down years ago." "Apparently not. How would you know?" "I am here on the behalf of the NFPF, specifically to find this print. We had long given up on recovering a film as we searched for this one, until last month I got a tip from an anonymous contributor that we might have overlooked some places." We were silent for a while, as I felt the weight of his matter sink in. "So what happens next?" I asked. "I've been trying to bargain with the," he swallowed, "person running this place, but he doesn't seem very responsive. I don't know whether he even understands how valuable it is, how valuable anything in this museum is. Really, he is a rather eccentric man, I believe. He's even played around with the cameras himself." He pointed towards an encased film roll in the corner of the room. "Nothing I propose to him seems to get through his skull. I'm not sure what extent he even understands English. I've been arguing with him for days within this strange, isolated place without progress." He fell silent. "One has to catch his breath now and then. You wait here. I'll see if I can knock some sense into him." And so the old man left me in the company of the old, unnerving stills. After wandering some more around the museum, I discovered some more stills from famous films I had considered lost, such as Saved from the Titanic and Dracula's Death. I quickly grew tired of this sterile white environment with nothing but unnerving stills and walls of cryptic text to keep me company. I was already considering leaving when I heard a voice from directly behind me. "We broadcast film now." Slowly turning around, I gazed directly into the receptionist's emotionless face. How could I not have heard him coming? "Jesus, man, you scared me," I whispered. The man frowned. "We broadcast now," he told me, slower and heavier this time. I should have ran right there and then, but being the idiot I was, I felt intimidated and followed him. He led me to what looked like some sort of mini-cinema. A small film projector, about 20 chairs and no windows. He gestured that I should sit down while he put the film in the projector. It was the film the old man had pointed to. What would he be up to now, anyway? But my thoughts were interrupted by the rattling of the projector, and the film started. There was a stylized title card which simply said, Baldur's Drama. Then the real movie began, and I saw black and white shots of vast abandoned cities, way more modern than could have been filmed at the time. Massive skyscrapers, cracked and decaying and covered in clay and dust. Immense suburbs flooded with sand, riddled with human skeletons. The sun shone brighter than I had ever seen, revealing every gruesome detail. My eyes were glued to the screen. This was unreal. Then the movie abruptly cut to black, which awoke me from my trance. I looked around and saw the receptionist was gone. I heard that the projector was still running, and sure enough the film continued. This time the camera was slowly moving forward in a hallway full of windows. It puzzled me, before I realized that it was an aeroplane. Something else far too new for a silent film. As the camera kept moving towards and slowly swung up and down, I realized that it meant to be in first person. I saw the camera pan down and focus on a rock that looked exactly like mine. I didn't know what to think of this. After a while, the camera went to the side and lowered itself, as if the person was meant to represent sitting down in one of the seats. Over time, I noticed that more and more of the person's possessions were identical to mine. His briefcase, his clothes, and his wallet, which he opened, revealing a picture of my wife. I was paralyzed. For a moment I considered that the whole experience had been some strange dream. I knew it couldn't be. It felt too real. I saw the plane take off, and for a long time nothing significant happened on screen. But I didn't want to leave. I wanted to see what was going to happen to me. Suddenly I noticed the pattern of the clouds had changed. The plane was moving downwards. At first it was barely noticeable, but soon enough I saw small objects falling into the front of the plane. Slowly I saw the people on the plane getting more and more nervous, until they started to freak out, myself included. The camera started shaking wildly and speeding towards no particular place, faster and faster, until the light of the plane dimmed, and the whole screen went black in an instant. I noticed that I was sweating, and I slowly came out of my trance. I needed to get out of this place right now. I ran out of the cinema like a cornered animal, through the halls with black and white stills until I reached the receptionist lobby, where I paused for a second to catch my breath. I was about to open the door when I saw an abandoned walking stick lying on the floor, like it had been thrown away. The old man. When I realized what this meant, I sped out of the door. I never wanted to be near this place again, ever. After waiting anxiously at the bus stop, I took the bus back into the inner city. As I was walking back to my hotel, I noticed that the poster that had led me to the museum was gone, and vanished as if it had never existed. I'm at my third cousin's house now. I've been staying here for a few weeks, trying to forget what happened. He and his family have been very hospitable and nice, but I feel they are slowly getting tired of my presence. Eventually, I'll have to take the plane back home. I have trouble sleeping at night because of what happened at the museum. But even with my family, I don't feel safe. I'm still trying to enjoy the days spent here because I know they will be my last. Credit to Arctic Wolf.